Today I'm going to go through how to create your own widget. And we're going to do this a couple different ways. There'll be a widget where you can start and stop, as well as get status of active. You can change the set point manually, or with a gauge. We're going to do it two different ways. First, we're going to create a widget using horizontal and vertical layouts. Then we're going to create the widget on the right using a grid layout. Notice how they're very similar, but each have their own advantages. Let's get started. First off, we're also going to import in tag data types from the controller. We're going to create those tag data types as a wrapper type of VFD in the model folder. We're going to create widgets here. I'm going to call it VFD control and VFD control grid. And then we're going to drop those instances on a screen and put them on a navigation panel. Let's start with a new project. We're going to go to New, type in a new name. I like to just choose version control. That way you can push the files to the cloud, a GitHub repository or similar. You can pick any resolution you want because it can resize on the fly quite easily, but I like to work with something slightly less than a resolution on my monitor. Click Create. Let's start by creating a new COM driver. New RA Ethernet IP driver. New RA Ethernet IP station. You give it an IP address. You type it in the route over here. If you forget the format, you can hover on the route and it'll give you that syntax, IP address / backplane / slot. So we can type in the IP address. For me, I'm using an Echo controller, but you can use a real PLC. Let's then double click on Tag Importer, change this mode to online, and it'll import the tags from the controller. We'll click on the tags that you want to bring in. You don't have to bring in all of them. Today we're going to just work in the VFD tags, these VFD items here. You could just import everything, not a big difference. Once you create that, it will create a controller tags folder, and more importantly, it'll create the data types in here as well. Variable types with a structure called motor VFD. That's the UDT, or the user-defined data type, in the controller with these properties: active, actual speed, faulted, reset, start, stop, etc. Each with their data types as well. They've also created data type that's more of an FactoryTalk Optix data type. The actual structure is more important in this case. Next, we're going to create a model folder to kind of bring those data types in. Because they're named very generically in the controller, it'd be nice to have some context. Now you can read the extended properties of the tags from the controller, but sometimes it's nice to have that context only in the HMI as well. So in this case, I like to create a new folder inside my model, and let's call it VFDs. And I also like to create a types folder, and let's do types here as well. We're going to create a new object inside of here. Let's call it VFD, and we're going to do one thing. We're going to put the data type of an alias so we can pass in the motor VFD tag into this object. We're going to add new alias. Let's call it controller tag alias. The kind is going to be important as well to help find that structure. And later on, we're going to go down to the variable tags and drag over that structure into the kind. That way, when we are hooking up the tags to the widget, we'll know that structure and can actually browse down into the active, reset, and start items inside that structure. And now we have a VFD kind of object. Now we need to create a type. You can simply drag it down into the model type, and it creates a type for us. We're going to rename this instance, let's say transfer pump. Okay. Here's our type. Let's actually drag that VFD into our types folder. Let's spell types properly. And now notice how we have the type in parentheses around VFD, and we have that that item here. We could also optionally add in some properties. I'm not really going to use those properties for this demo, but at this time we can do some other things that's specific to the HMI. Let's maybe give it an example where you could maybe have a configuration of maybe your alarms, maybe like a alarm failed to start or something. Okay, and that way you could configure it here and it would be part of your structure, so that every instance of that will also get that configuration. See how I click on the transfer pump here? It inherits that property that's part of the type. Let's add a few more VFDs objects to this. Let's add in, let's say, a new VFD type. See how that type appears now under the new property because I've created a type of that. Let's call it mash pump. Now I'm going to hook up those tags to the tags in the controller. So notice how we have the controller tag alias. All we have to do is drag those over. So on this first one is transfer pump. I'm going to drag this tag and drop it here. So I hooked that up. Click on the second one. Same way, I'm going to drag and drop. VFD2. Upper fan will be 302. Pump 3 is going to be 303. And inlet pump is going to be 304. Now we have all our structures hooked up. Now let's go in to start making our widgets. Under the UI folder, let's create a new folder called, I like to use the word widgets here. You could also do templates. Start off by either using a panel or a screen. Really, they're exactly the same, except the screen has a border color. So let's go under containers, click screen. I'm going to call this VFD control. Use a new container horizontal layout. We're going to go stretch on that. This will allow it to resize on the fly to its parent size. The parent, which would be this screen here, this is the one that's going to have at least a starting size of 300 by 320, yet it can still resize itself. So we can leave this stretch and then change this auto to 300 by 320. That way we can have something to kind of start with. Now that still can resize. If we double click on the horizontal layout, the VFD control will have a border color, so you have it'll be black, but also we want to give it a thickness so that we can actually see it. It's going to be a 2 here, so we can start to see that border. The item inside of it, this horizontal layout, we want it to kind of offset just slightly inside. So when we click on horizontal layout, we want a little bit of padding or margin with it. So let's change this to 5, 5, 5, and 5. So that horizontal layout, imagine just one row, has some padding around it. Okay, inside this horizontal layout, we'll have 2 vertical layouts. Container, vertical layout 1, new container, vertical layout 2. We're going to put both of those as stretch. You can multi-select, change both of those to stretch, and see how they kind of pull up as 2 columns inside of there. Inside of the first column, we're going to have a label, and then a button, momentary button. This is going to be our start button, and then another stop button. There'll be another horizontal layout underneath that, new horizontal layout, to then hold on to our LEDs. So this is going to be horizontal stretch and vertical top. Yeah, that'll be fine. Then we're going to have two LEDs inside of it. Inside of this horizontal will be new base control LED, new base control LED. On LED 2, we want to leave that red and change the text to faulted. And LED 1, change the text to active. Let's change the color also to a green. We can type in green. And it uses HTML color, so a lot of them you can type in the name of it without spaces. Horizontal layout, we're going to stretch. Horizontal layout, instead of left aligned, it's going to be center aligned. Okay, with a little padding there. Ten, 0, 10, and the same for the other one. 10, 0, 10. Okay, that's looking nice. Then let's go back to those momentary buttons. Let's put some margin around it. Let's change some, highlight both of them. So Control, click, highlight both of them. We're going to do stretch, stretch, and a little padding around it, margin. Let's do 20, 20, 20, 20. Button 1 is going to be start. Button 2, stop. Label 1, horizontally, let's do stretch. We need it to be top. Here we go. Now, the text itself needs to be center aligned, center aligned. Next, let's work on the vertical layout on the right side. It's going to have mainly those gauges and a way to change set point. So let's put in a panel to hold those gauges, container panel, and a new horizontal layout, and another, so two horizontal layouts after that. New container horizontal layout, new container horizontal layout. So the first panel, let's call it our gauge pad. Okay. So we need to pad out some of our gauges. This horizontal layout, we're just going to have two combo boxes, spin boxes I should say. So let's put two spin boxes in this horizontal layout. 1, 2, and then we're going to have two labels in the lower horizontal layout. New base control label, new base control label. Okay, those two spin boxes are going to be set height of stretch top 50. Multi-select both of them. Stretch top 50. Horizontal layout is going to be stretch top 50 as well, left aligned, stretch top 50. This upper gauge panel is going to be stretch 2010 2020, stretch 2010 2020. And we're going to put our two gauges inside of it. So we're going to go new base control linear gauge, and a second one, new base control linear gauge inside of it. They're going to be set to vertical. Let's multi-select both of them. Value change on while editing. Okay. It's going to be vertical, center, stretch, height or width 72. Okay. and horizontally center. There we go. Now the start gauge is going to be, so we'll have the, let's change the names of these two gauges just to offset it. So there'll be a control gauge and a start gauge, or a stat gauge. The control gauge has, I think that's in the right place. Yeah. We want the status gauge just a little to the right. So that should be a left margin of 45. There we go. We're not going to edit on the status gauge, so let's remove the editable, change that property to false. It gets rid of the handle. Also, we want to get rid of the tooltip. It's going to be false on both of them. Okay, good. We're going to get rid of the scale on one of them. Okay, so on the control gauge, label visible, false. That way we can get rid of the second gauge labels, and that's looking pretty good. Next, let's work on our spin boxes. Spin boxes, you can turn these arrows off. You can disable the arrows. Let's editable, show buttons false. And on the right, only the left one we want editable, so on the right one we want editable false. And then we're going to stretch them out vertically, stretch, there we go. And we're going to change this to stretch top. You could leave it stretch, but let's do stretch top. I like stretch. Let's leave it like that. And then this lower horizontal layout is going to be horizontally. So now we're working in the labels, our set and actual. Kind of like the labels above the spin boxes. So let's move this horizontal layout above, so we can switch the position of those two, so that our labels are above. Horizontal layout stretch. Vertical alignment, let's say top. And our labels inside. It's going to be horizontal alignment center, height, center. First label will be set. Label 2 actual. There we go. Stretch. Stretch top. There we go. Much better. 25. Okay, now we're getting real close. Let's look at the font now. What I like to do, since all of this text is pretty similar, we're going to go into the default style sheet and change the global text to a value of 20. So we double click on the default style sheet and browse down into the font size, the default 12. We're going to change it to 20. Now that's looking really good, except our LEDs are a little big now. And our LEDs, we're going to back those off and hard code them into a font of 10. So we're going to go down in our LEDs, change its font size. Instead of auto, which is 20, we're going to hard code those into 10. It's looking really good. Now we've created all the objects that we want to use for our faceplate, for our VFD control. Now we're going to hook it up to the tag members that we created earlier. That motor VFD data type comes from the controller. We created the model tags, a wrapper type, add an alias to our VFD control. We're at the top level. Notice we're at the parent level, the very top level of our VFD control widget. We're going to click on the plus sign and go add alias. Let's give it a name like, make it unique. It's important that it's unique so that you can find it easier in a filter, an alias folder. So let's call it VFD control _ alias. You can leave the kind blank, but however, it is important when we are hooking these tags up to set the kind, and the kind is only used at design time. So if we just drag over the type So that's under our model folder, types that we created earlier. Drag over VFD type and drop it in that kind. Now, when we go to instantiate that, we're going to pass in one of these instances into our faceplate. So let's start tagging out our widget here. So if we go in, we can start clicking on our objects like our start push button. Let's go to active. We click on the dynamic link. We go up to aliases, and we'll find our VFD control alias. Now that we've set the type, that VFD type, we can browse into it. We can then browse into its alias that has been hooked up, and its type, motor VFD, that's the controller tag. Our start push button here, now we can browse into that structure, click start, and select. And go through all of your objects, hooking up these tags as we go along. It should remember your place where it is, so you don't have to browse down in too far. It remembers where you're at. Click the stop now. We can use a special property. We can browse into that object, and we want to use the context here. Not the VFD1, 2, or VFD203 coming from the controller, but we want to use this context here. To do that, we would click on that top level, go to attribute. I want to use display name. Well, we haven't talked about that. We could use this tag with the underscore is the browse name. I like using the display name so we can get the spaces in there. You can't have spaces in your object names. So I'm going to use display name, select, and then I'm going to go in and actually set the display names of our instances. So you click on the top level on your objects here, and you click plus, display name. And I'm going to say transfer space pump, and mash pump, I'm going to add display name. Now that we have all those hooked up, let's drop an instance of it on a screen. Now that we have our widget and everything is hooked up, now let's actually build our screens. We're finally getting to that point. On the screens, let's do a new screen. Also on the main window, we can come up here, new, containers, navigation panel. Navigation panel is an easy way to display a lot of screens in a tabbed form. So if we zoom out here, we can see this navigation panel object is dropped in. Let's go stretch on it. Stretch to really fill out the full screen. And let's give our screen a name. Let's call it, how about VFD widgets? Okay. And on our screen, we could drag and drop from our user interface folder down here, or we right click on the screen, new. Now we go into our widgets folder that we created, and that widget that we made, VFD control, and we add that new widget in. Notice how it just expanded to the full size of our screen. We want to put kind of a bound on that, and in this case, because we made our widget as a stretch, notice out here, stretch, so it'll stretch out to whatever the parent will let it stretch out. So what I like to do is maybe put a bound on it. Let's do containers, panel. Let's give that panel a, so we can do VFD panel. We drag that control object inside of it, and then we can assign width and height that we'd like. So we have 300 by 320. Now we're really getting into it, and we can kind of move it around and place it on the screen where we'd like to place it. And we can resize it however we want. So you can grab these handles and resize it the way you like. If you wanted a little more portrait or horizontal, you can definitely do that and set it to the size you like, because the widget's going to resize to that. I kind of like the 300 by 320. Okay, and that's looking really good. Now finally, we want to hook up the tag. We're going to hook it up statically this time. We can also dynamically assign it. If we click on the top level of our instance, notice there's no type parentheses, and we have an alias item here that's blank. This is where we're going to pass in our instance into this object. So we have, let's use the transfer pump, this first object, drag and drop it in that alias, and we're done. Next we want to make sure that navigation panel now has our screen that we made, this VFD widget screen. We'll drag this widget screen and drop it in our navigation panel. And now we should be able to browse to it. Okay, let's run it on emulate. It looks like everything is correct, except for our numbers. Our numbers need a little formatting, doesn't it? So let's take a look at that. So to look at the formatting of the spin box, we want to display 2 decimal places on a float value or a real tag from the controller. So if we go down into our widget, or VFD control widget, down and click on the spin box, on a lot of other objects, let's say a label or text or other items, you might have to put on a string formatter on the value. But actually in this case, we wouldn't have to do that actually. We can easily just go to the input format, which is really cool. So that's N6. Now it is the format. You can look at the string formatter to figure out this input format. So this is showing N6, which is like 6 decimal places. What I'd like to do is just display 2 decimal places, and F is to display the dot and a comma, I believe, if you go over 1,000. So I like to use just F2 for that, and then we'll display just 2 decimal places. See how that? That's why I like the spin box. It's really nice. Also, on the spin box, you can use a minimum. You can set the minimum and maximum value. So if you want to lock in, let's say you don't want the operator to go above 6 or 0, or if you don't want to set over 100 or something, you can set those min and max values on the operator, which is really nice. Let's repoint this to the set value on our VFD. Set speed, select, and F2 on the input. Let's click that as well on the actual, so it changes N6 to F2. Now when we display it, it should display 2 decimal places. Let's run it again. And there we are, 2 decimal places. Next, let's add a couple more objects to our screen. So on the VFD widgets, we have 1 instance of it. Let's add a couple more instances of our object. So what we can do is drag on a couple new panels. Let's do base control container panel. Let's do another panel. Let's set it and do a copy paste 300 by 320. Place it potentially where we want it. And then we could do a copy paste. And let's hard code a couple more of our objects to it. Let's add in a new widget VFD control, new widget VFD control, and let's hook up our tags to it. So on this mash pump here, click here, and upper fan here. Okay. See how it looks. There we go. We've just hard coded in our VFDs, our tags coming from a controller. The next video in this series, I'll create the same widget using the grid layout this time. Thank you for watching.